You. Thank you so much for being here, and apologies for the delay. I had to go run and get something. Just quickly, again, please turn off your cell phones. The ringer is super annoying when people are talking, as you probably know. The best way to support our guests today is to go buy the book after the talk and go to the signing tent where she'll be signing her books. And the book signings follow every session, and she'll go there immediately after this talk. There's water over there if you're hungry, or thirsty. Please stay hydrated today. Clearly I'm not, as you can tell. And if you need anything else, see one of the ushers or go to the info tent. And we will reserve a little bit of time at the end for questions, 10 minutes or so. So just if you have some questions, when you get the sign, feel free to line up over here at this microphone. Don't be offended if we have to end up cutting some questions off. That usually happens because there's so many people that want to ask good questions. This afternoon, we're very pleased to welcome to the tent Safiya Sinclair, discussing her acclaimed memoir, How to Say Babylon, with her editor, Dawn Davis. And Safiya is an acclaimed Jamaican poet and memoirist, is the National Book Critics Circle Award for her book. This powerful memoir about breaking free from a strict religious upbringing to find her own voice was a New York Times notable book, a Time Top 10 Nonfiction selection, and featured on President Barack Obama's reading list. Sinclair is also the author of the award-winning poetry collection Cannibal and has received such prestigious honors as the Guggenheim Fellowship, and she is also a professor of creative writing at Arizona State University. So welcome, Safiya. Thank you for being here. And Dawn Davis is the founding publisher of 37 Inc., an imprint of Simon Schuster, where she has published numerous award-winning and best-selling books, including The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan and Master Slave Husband Wife, by Ilyon Woo. After a brief departure to lead Bon Appétit magazine, I didn't know that. What? She returned to publishing to continue her work on How to Say Babylon by Safiya, and hailed as one of the best memoirs of the 21st century. And she also serves on the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival Advisory Board, so thank you for that. And again, please welcome our speakers today.
Is this on? Can you hear me? First, I want to thank so many friends I see in the audience who've traveled from as far as East Chop, which is far on this island, and just thank you. And I also want to say how exciting it is for Safiya and I to be in dialogue together. We talked a lot when we were editing, but not so much since publication about the process of publishing this book. So it's a real kind of honor for us. And I think at a festival like this, some people have read the book, some people are curious about it. And so I think let's just start with, what does How to Say Babylon mean? What is the book about? And what does that Babylon mean?
Okay. I'm happy to be here with you, and happy for y'all to get some insider info about the book. So the book is about my strict Rastafari upbringing in Jamaica, with my militant Rasta father, and kind of growing up with all of these really repressive rules that were given to me and my sisters and women in Rastafari, and eventually coming to question some of those rules and figuring out for myself through my writing and through poetry my own voice and who I wanted to be in the world and define womanhood on my own terms. Babylon, it's a Rastafari term. For them, Babylon represents anything that's connected to colonialism, imperialism, anything that's tied to repressive authoritarianism, they call Babylon. Most people might not know that in Jamaica, the Rastafari are 1% or less of the Jamaican population, that they're historically a persecuted minority in Jamaica, that when the Rasta movement began, a lot of the Rastas were turned away from their families. They were, kicked out of their homes, forbidden from having jobs, forbidden from walking along the beach sides that were being developed for tourists. We had a prime minister in the 60s that said, "Bring me all Rastas, dead or alive." And this led to a really harrowing weekend where Rastafari all over the island were jailed and forcibly shaved, their dreadlocks forcibly cut. You might be surprised to know my siblings and I were among the first Rasta children to integrate public schools in Jamaica in the late 80s and 90s. And so for the Rastafari, this idea of the strife and the struggle and being attacked, being persecuted, comes from the outside world, which they see as Babylon.
So as a young woman, you're the first to integrate your public schools. You're growing these dreadlocks. People made fun of you. You were an outsider.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that experience, what school was like for you, and how you and your siblings kind of became even more tight as a result.
Yeah. So my siblings and I were the only Rasta children in school. And so, that led to, as you might imagine, other children were not very kind to us. We were teased, we were ostracized. But I think the thing that really stuck with me was that even my teachers treated us badly. They treated us like outcasts because of this view of Rastafari historically as being, kind of like uncivilized, uneducated, savage people. This is the view that a lot of Jamaicans have of Rastafari in Jamaica. And so, we were treated unkindly, and that made us even closer because anywhere we went, we were the only. But we were also high achievers, so we were very visible in many ways in Montego Bay.
Your mother developed a system. I forgot exactly what it was called, but it was an education system. Safiya is an internationally acclaimed poet, not just a Jamaican acclaimed poet. Her poetry is published in languages all over. Your brother's a lawyer. Your sister has so many degrees, I lost count.
Sister is a clinical psychologist. Youngest sister is a computer engineer.
And your mom created an education system.
Yeah.
What did you call it? SNP?
It's SPIC. And it was for, she created this curriculum for me and my siblings she taught us after school. And it was her specific curriculum that she created to include art and music in our education and poetry. And so she would have me and my siblings memorize and recite poetry. And, we would paint, we would make our own songs. She would take us on nature walks and do this sort of botanical cataloging of everything we saw. So we would know the name of every plant, every tree, every flower, every insect. And so by the time we got to school, a lot of people in Montego Bay were asking her, "How come your children so bright? What's the secret?" And so my mother actually began teaching her curriculum to all the children of Montego Bay.
One of the things, your father was also alienated from your own family. I mean, your mother's family was not pleased. And you started out on the sea, this coastal home that you had, carved out, saved from hotel development. But as your father became more and more kind of strict in his beliefs, you kept moving further up the mountains. And one of the things I loved about editing this book was getting to see a Jamaica that we don't see in the touristy, stereotypical images of Jamaica. So talk to us about, White House and where you grew up.
I was born in this tiny fishing village in Montego Bay called White House, and it belongs to my mother's family, and her father, her brothers, her grandfather, they were all fishermen. And so, this is where I was born. And so for me, the sea is something that I'm always connected to, and it's something that always connects me also to my mother. And it's inevitably then connected to my poetry, to my language, the way I think about the rhythm of what I'm writing comes from the heartbeat of the sea where I was born.
I want to talk a little bit about you obviously have a gift. You and your siblings are smart. When did you know that you were gifted with language? How did you get introduced to language on that level and know that, I have a voice as a poet, or I can develop a voice as a poet? Talk to us about that experience.
So I always loved poetry because of my mom, and she made it fun. She made it, when we recited our poems, it was part of what was fun. Like, my mother really broadened the horizons of our imagination. And it was, I think by the time I was 9 or 10 is when I really started to think about writing in that way. I would say the catalyst was actually, there was a girl at school that I thought was my friend, and, something really terrible happened. She sent somebody with a note that said, "I don't want to be your friend. I don't want to be friends with a Rasta." And, at 10 years old, that was like really devastating. And I tried to harm myself. As you know, I stepped on a rusted nail. And I was on bed rest for a couple weeks. And for some reason, I felt like my mother knew. She knew something was wrong. That was the first time I really felt a little bit uncertain of myself and ashamed, actually, to be myself at such a young age. And my mother handed me my first collection of poems. And she said, "Read this. I think it will help you." And she said, "Poetry has always been the thing that made my world wide and wild and warmer." And then she said, "That's alliteration." And I said, "What's alliteration?" And then the damage was done, That was it. And I read this poem, and the poem I remember reading is this poem called "The Tiger" by William Blake. Which some of you might know, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye shall tame thy fearful symmetry?" And I was reading this at 10 years old, and I remember just being completely possessed, entranced, and all the hurt that I'd felt previously from this incident at school, I felt it viscerally evaporating from me, and it was replaced by this sense of wonder. And I'll say that at 10 years old, that sense of wonder. And then I wrote my first poem in imitation of Blake called "The Butterfly." And, I knew since that age, writing and chasing that sense of wonder, as long as I had that sense of wonder, I would always be okay.
And at a very young age, you published a poem in a newspaper, and it won a national contest. Talk to me about how that boosted your confidence or transformed your life in some way or introduced you to a new world.
Yes, so I published my first poem at 16 in the national newspaper. And as Dawn said, yes, it won a prize. And I was there. I collected this prize with grown people. And I was like 16. And, it's a poem called "Silver." It's actually in the book.
Would you read it for us?
Would you like me to read it? Okay, so I always preface this by saying I wrote this at 16. Okay, so be kind. But it was a poem that really blew open my world. It was the first time I felt that I wasn't just writing my poems in my room, in my little imagination, that there were people who were actually interested in what I had to say, and that I had a voice. Because growing up in my house, I was always encouraged to be silent and obedient. And it felt for a long time that my voice didn't matter. And so when I published this poem in the paper, I thought, wow, like my voice, I have a voice, and maybe I should keep speaking. So this is "Silver." Silver flows through my veins, into my hands when I caress the strings of my guitar. Silver is the moon I swallowed on a dry, dreary night when I willed it so. Silver is the rain in May, wholesome and lithe and falling into me. Our springtime saraband kisses me sodden. Up, then I'm happy, down, then I'm sad. Silver, I cry, silver. Silver encases my heart like a drunk jeweler quenching a cigarette. Silver is my lips against the ice, my tongue upon the frost, my sweet staccato, my praline dress, my stuck umbrella on a sunshiny day. Silver is the witty wind coaxing my eyes to sleep upon the blurred pastel pages of a slipshod butterfly. Silver is a legerdemain, legs like a leprechaun that feeds on lemons, a choir of my deepest thoughts, the inkling of my most secret soul. It is the palsied web of the crestfallen spider, the dewdrop ring that scars my finger like acid, dusk that brings the sidereal night, resting its echo upon the wing of a firefly that drinks the silver from my eyes. Silver is my billowing meerschaum, is the flicking goldfish fin in the silent sun. Silver are the wispy strands in my hair, lined silver, spiraling through the universe. Silver chose me. Like starlight to the naked eye, the words I bleed are silver. The time that dances minuets upon my broken sylvan skin is silver in a lancer's armor. When my stomach bursts and I disgorge eternity, silver stands beside me playing the viol. The weight, the wind are uxorious, for they are solely silver, ever heading my way. My ears are filled with pixies' dreams, like honey, only silver. When the days of maiden's trouble subside, silver peels away. My belly swells, and it'll be a while, but I know more silver is welling inside.
Right. So you're 15. You have this published in the newspaper.
Yeah.
You're finding your voice, but at home, your voice is repressed because you're learning there are rules for girls that don't apply to your brother.
Yes.
That you were treated equally in the world until a certain time, and then your brother has access and freedom, and you don't. And so there's this growing tension in your household.
Yes.
And ultimately, you have to choose: do you embrace your father's rules, or do you become the woman with the voice that you're destined to be? So what was that like? How did you process?
Yeah, it was an interesting time because my brother and I are very close. We're 2 years apart. So we grew up until I was 8 years old. We grew up like very close. We would do everything together. We were wild children. We would run about the yard. We would climb trees. We would play roughly. And then one day my father kind of called me to him and he said, "How tall are you now?" And, I started to get very tall. And, he looked me up and down and he said, "Okay, you're not wearing pants anymore. You're not wearing shorts anymore." And he told my mother to throw out all the pants, all the shorts. He said, "No girl of mine is going to wear pants anymore like a Jezebel." And he said, "You can't climb trees anymore. Girls don't do that. You can't ride a bicycle." I was like, and then I would watch my brother doing all the things. I would see him climbing the trees, riding the bicycles. And it seemed, at 9, 10 years old, incredibly unfair. And so that was the first time I started to question the rules. It didn't feel okay to me in my spirit. And I could read the passage about this moment as well. If I can find it.
It just seems incredible to me to have, I have sons, so I'm not raising daughters, but to have a child with so much light and intelligence and then to kind of suppress who they are. These rules in Rasta, not only did you couldn't wear the pants, You had to cover your hair, no makeup, no jewelry, no friends that your father didn't sanction.
That's right. Couldn't have friends or company. Couldn't go to sleepovers. No friends came over. So, I was very happy I had my siblings because my sisters and I weren't really allowed to leave the house. So I had my siblings and I had books.
Because I think so many people think of Rasta as a musical culture, but it's really almost, as I was reading it, I understood it almost as a religion, a very orthodox, intense
It is a religion. Yeah.
And I think that so little of that's actually known here.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's part of the reason I wanted to write the book, to re-narrativize the ideas that people have of Rastafari and expand the view of Rastafari beyond this idea that it's just music or it's just male-centered. I think many people would never even have in their mind the image of a young Rasta girl or a Rasta woman. And so writing the book, I wanted to give a portraiture of what Jamaican womanhood is like, real Jamaica, beyond the postcard paradise idea, and also give a portrait of Rasta girlhood, what it was like growing up for me inside of Rastafari.
Yeah.
So I'll read this passage. I came to realize what my father wanted was the perfect daughter. And when a Rasta man said daughter, he meant both his wife and his child. As my father called my mother his daughter when speaking to his Rasta brethren, who also called their partners their daughters. For the men of Rastafari, the perfect daughter was everything a woman was supposed to be. The perfect daughter was whittled from Jah's mighty oak, cultivating her holy silence. She spoke only when spoken to. The perfect daughter was humble and had no care for vanity. She had no needs, yet nursed the needs of others, breastfeeding an army of Jah's mighty warriors. And Jah is the term for the Godhead figure of Rastafari. The perfect daughter sat under the apple shade and waited to be called, her mind empty and emptying. She followed no God but her father until he was replaced by her husband. The perfect daughter was nothing but a vessel for the man's seed, unblemished clay waiting for Jah's fingerprint. You're old enough now to help out in the kitchen, my father told me, making quick work of me. Now I need to learn from your mother. Watch how she carries herself. I watched my mother and found in her long silences something potent waiting to be said, like the anxious moment before thunder. But no matter how much I longed for it, she never thundered. She never spoke her mind or disagreed with my father. She smoked and breastfed my baby sister. She smoked and spared me from the tedium of kitchen work. She smoked and woke up before dawn to cook all our meals and hand wash all our clothes, folding them away afterward like her thoughts in the chest of drawers, untouched. She was the perfect daughter. Perhaps it was true what my father said, that I lacked discipline. The way any 9-year-old lacks discipline. I didn't always listen. I was skeptical. I doubted his gospel. I was curious. I touched the flame simply because it was burning. Because discipline always seemed to me the pin that held the butterfly in its display case. Work maketh the man, my father used to tell us. Day after day, I swung over those words and saw ahead of me a life withering under all his multiplying decrees. Day after day, my heart bucked up against it. I was never going to be the perfect daughter. A grin of mischief opened ever so slyly inside of me, a seedling of a voice that said no. Woo.
One of the many passages that I love. I think, I don't want to spoil the book for those of you who've not read it, but there is this beautiful scene on the hardcover. We put a picture of locks being cut because part of Rasta culture is you also had to wear your hair in locks. And you one day decide you were going to break free.
Yeah.
No spoiler alert. She's here with us now. She breaks free. But your mother,
Yes.
talk to us about your mother's role in that, because I think it's so beautiful. She was complicit until she was ready.
Yeah, and she was seemingly complicit. I think when I was a teenager, I couldn't really see all the things that my mother had been doing, to really forge her own kind of quiet rebellion, all the things that she had done to change the course of my life. So when I was 15, to me, strength only looked one way. And I thought, why doesn't she thunder? Why doesn't she, fight back? Why doesn't she do all these things? And then when I was writing the book, I began to see, there's a moment at the beginning of the book where my mother saves me from drowning. There's a moment where she hands me my first collection of poems. She's the one who mailed in my little poems when I was 15 years old. She went to the post office and mailed them to the newspaper. She eventually helped me get to college. There were so many moments where she was the hand that guided the moments of my life. And one of the most important moments that my mother helped to shape was that moment where I said to her, I just don't feel like myself. Part of being Rastafari is wearing the dreadlocks, which many people kind of think of as a hairstyle. But to the Rastafari, it's not a hairstyle. It's like a holy covenant. It's a sacred marker to your devotion to Rastafari and your purity. And so, but for me, growing up, it really felt like an anchor. It felt like a burden. It felt like something that tethered me to my father and his rules, and something that represented my loss of autonomy, that I wasn't able to choose for myself who I wanted to be. And one day, I was in a lot of inner turmoil. Spoiler alert, there's a lot of inner turmoil. And, I said to my mom, I just don't think I can survive this. I don't think I can continue like this. I need your help. And she said, okay, just tell me how I can help. Tell me what you need me to do. And this is what happened next.
While she looks for that, I'll just remind you that when we're about 10, 15 minutes out, I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you have questions, you can start saving them up.
Okay. So this is what happened next. Mom told me to hold down my head, and I held down my head. She asked me if I was ready, and I said yes. Beside me, the sea breeze made womanly shapes in the lace of my curtain, and no one among us spoke. I don't know who held the scissors or who made the first cut. All I heard were the hinges of the shears locking and unlocking, the blades cutting. And then long black reeds of hair fell away in their quick hands. My dreadlocks came loose around me like ruined limbs. I closed my eyes then because I could not look at what I was losing. I had railed for so long and had not expected it to matter when the moment came. But now I found that it mattered a great deal. My throat burned with a peculiar remorse as all my dreadlocks fell away. For what was Medusa without her snakes? There was hair, so much hair, dead hair, hair of my gone self, wisps of spiderweb hair, old uniform lint hair, pillow sponge and tangerine strings hair. A whole life pulled itself up by my hair. The hair that locked the year I broke my tooth, hair that locked the day we caught cane ashes in the yard, hair of our lean years, hair of the fat, pollen of marigold's hair, my mother's aloe vera hair, my sister's weaving wild ixoras in my hair, the pull of the tides at our sea village hair, grits of sand hair, hair of salt tears, hair thick with the blood of my own cut wrists. Hair of my binding, hair of my unbeautiful wanting, hair of his bitter words, hair of the cruel world, hair roping me to my father's belt, hair wrestling the taunts of bald heads in the street, hair of my lone self, hair wrapped atop the ghost woman in white's hair, red thread of hair, centuries of hair, galloping future of incorrigible hair, all cut away from me. When they were finished, my neck and head were so light, they swung unsteady. The tethers had been cut from me, and I was new again, unburdened. Someone different, I told myself. A girl who could choose what happened next.
Wow. So I got the sign. I thought we had more time than we did. It went so quickly. So we're going to open it up to questions. I see with the green shirt went up first. I guess you line up here on the right, to the right of me. Is that right? If you're looking that way.
By the way, I came all the way from Katema. That's further than East Chup. So I think you mentioned that you're close with your mother, so she's still alive,
Yeah,
I guess.
everyone's still alive.
And your dad, too.
Yes.
Could you tell us your relationship with your mom and your dad now, and especially with your dad as you were evolving after the cut and as you kind of sailed away?
Well, I'm not going to give it all away. Got to read it to the end. But, I have the closest relationship with my mom. We talk several times a day. She is my biggest supporter, my biggest cheerleader. She reads everything I write. She reads the first draft. She gives me glowing praise for everything. And she comes to a lot of my events. She sits in the front row. There were times where I would read my poems and I would look down and see my mom mouthing the words of the poem.
I've seen that. She says, I have my own poet.
She said, I just can't believe I have my own personal poet. So for her, a poetry lover who gave birth to a poet who now writes poems about her is her dream come true, And, she'll sit in the audience, and when she's not mouthing the words of the poem, she'll, be looking at everyone are you paying attention? Are you seeing this? I made that. I did that. So my mom is amazing. She's my best friend. And, eventually she, too, cut her dreadlocks and left Rastafari, as did my sisters, to forge her own path to womanhood and choose for herself also who she wanted to be. And so I'm just happy for her as she's living her best life. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, thank you both. I heard you say something yesterday about the movement from poetry to memoir. And thanks. I'm curious to learn more about that journey for you. How has that been, and where do you know where you're going in terms of form now?
Yes, that's a good question. I think Dawn should answer some of this too, because coming from writing poetry to writing prose, it was a little bit of an adjustment for me, particularly in learning how to be edited. Because when I wrote poems, or even now when I write poems, I kind of write the poem and the process is a very solitary one. And then I hand the poem to whomever is publishing it and they say, thank you for this amazing poem. And I say, you're welcome. And when I wrote the first draft of the memoir, Dawn and my UK editor, they were like, this is fantastic, amazing, the best first draft we've ever read. And here are some notes that we had. And I was like, notes? Dawn. And I kind of didn't talk to her for 2-3 months. And then I, finally kind of went to the draft and I looked at the notes and I started to say, oh, actually that's a good suggestion. I think that, yes, I think so. And then I said, oh, I see now like why people have editors. Like, okay, they like objectively help you to make the draft better. And so for me, like prose was something, I always say it was a lesson in humility where I really had to learn how to be collaborative with my editor, but also to be even more disciplined than poetry, which is to sit at the page and keep going, like write an outline, think about a chapter, think about dialogue and narrative and climax, and think about, characterization. And with my poetry, I really just wait for the muse to come and touch my head,
Do we have time for one more question? Okay, one or two.
Hello.
Hi.
First, I want to say thank you. You
Thank
gave
you.
voice. I grew up with Rastas in my family, and it was so normal and part of it. And so to see your story, to see me in your story in the book has been phenomenal. And so I also, while I was reading your book, felt wildly protective. Don't tell them about us. I wonder how you felt in sharing this and wanting to feel protective of people not judging Rastafarianism and not putting judgment and shame and all of these words that can go along with such heavy stories and such very strong ways in which the culture exists, and how you were able to push through that to actually publish the book so that people like me who lived with that could feel it and see themselves in it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think about it as telling them about us, because even in Jamaica, I had Jamaican friends who were like, I had no idea this is what it was like growing up Rastafari. So it really was telling everyone about how I grew up. And I tried to be very specific in the book that this is how I grew up in my household, that you could choose a different Rasta household and they would have different rules. There were Rastafari who didn't wear shoes or didn't drive cars. There were Rasta children who weren't allowed to go to school. We went to school. So there were all different kinds of interpretations of Rastafari, because there's no one singular book. There's no holy book of Rastafari. There's, only a few tenets, but it's really wisdom passed down from brethren to brethren, as you know. And most times it is the Rasta brethren, the father, who is the Godhead of the household, who interprets what Rastafari is for him. So it's different from household to household. And I really wanted to be clear about that in the book, to say how many different ways Rastafari could be interpreted, how many different sects of Rastafari there are in Jamaica. But ultimately, it was very important for me that I told the truth. I told it with nuance. I gave grace. I gave a lot of grace to my father, and I wanted to present him with nuance. I wanted to understand him as best I could, so that whomever read the book could also come to him with a deeper understanding, that he was never presented one-sidedly. But ultimately, it was my story, and I had to tell it truthfully. Yeah, thank you.
So I also grew up in Jamaica and found the book to be incredibly revealing. I'm wondering if you're feeling any pressure to stay on Jamaica with your next book, or you feel any pressure given the success of this book?
Everything I write is Jamaica, is about Jamaica. I bleed Jamaica. I dream Jamaica. I'll never write, spoiler, no book I write will ever be about anything other than Jamaica. Jamaican people, Jamaican culture, Jamaican language, Jamaican womanhood. Everything Jamaica has given to me will always come back on the page of everything I write. Yeah.